Welcome back to Control the Freak. You'll remember I did a video a little while ago on good control, and I gave you the three examples of work, law, and children. I spoke to somebody a couple of weeks ago about the children episode, and they asked me to do another one, to see if I had anything more to offer on the idea of control with children. So that's what I'm going to do today. When it comes down to children, I think there's two things that are absolutely vital for good control with kids. And these two things are consistency and to question your motivations. You'll remember that I spoke about the 18-year-old girl in that story about control with children and how she'd been dominated and basically locked away until she was 18 years old. And then on her 18th birthday, she's given the key to the door and told, go and do what you want, and how it went drastically wrong for her. The only consistency there was that she was consistently controlled. That's bad control. The motivation for that was that the parents wanted to control her. God knows why, you can only ask them, but I think you can probably guess. When it comes to good control with children and consistency, I've got a little example for you. I was listening to a podcast the other day, a control podcast, and I think it was set in Australia. I think it's an Australian host anyway. And she did lots and lots of episodes on control. And this particular episode, she said that she'd had lots of parents writing in with questions about control with their children, but coming at it from the angle of the children being very controlling. And there was one letter that really stood out to me. This parent's letter went something like this. I have two issues with control with my child. One of them is that I can't give them any instruction or make a request for certain behaviour. The minute I start to do that, the child rears up and just says, I know, and cuts me off. And I'm not allowed to finish what I'm saying, because if I do, they just escalate. They just start really, throwing a tantrum. The other thing, the other control example, is whenever they have play dates and they have friends over, there comes a point during the play date, inevitably, where my child wants to play something that the other child doesn't want to. When that happens, my child loses their mind. They start smashing up the house. They tell the other friend they don't want to play with them. And it takes a good 45 minutes to bring them around, in which time, usually, the friendship has been damaged forever. What do? The advice that the expert gave was that this child needs to feel safe in their reaction, and that you shouldn't challenge them on it, because all you'll do there is regress them. And that the best thing you can do is, through some understanding and some patience, you'll all come to an understanding that this is how the child reacts, and that's the best way you can handle it. I thought this was insane. I thought this was absolutely insane advice. Now, there was no mention in the letter that this child might be somewhere on the autism spectrum. And I mention that because there's some parts of the autism spectrum whereby if things don't go the way the child wants them to go, can be catastrophic, and the child loses their mind and can have massive tantrums while they're trying to adjust. But there was no mention of that in this letter. So, setting that aside, let's just say, for example, this child has been taught and learned that these reactions are okay. And this expert is saying you've just got to get used to it and you mustn't challenge it. If we look at the demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation model, hopefully you can see how that applies to this scenario quite easily. You've got the demanding behaviour. In other words, there's a demand that the parent doesn't tell them what to do or make a request. There's also the demand that the other child plays what they want to play. They're obviously disproportionately beneficial to the child in all scenarios. And then when the child doesn't get its own way, it escalates. Demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation model, perfectly exampled there. The thing with that model is to start looking at the flags that go up when it comes to the disproportionate benefit, because you don't want it to get to escalation. Every time you agree to the disproportionate benefit, you're setting a new minimum expectation. There's an unspoken agreement now between the parent and this child that this disproportionate benefit is how it's going to be. You will always get things the way that you want them. So to that child, if it doesn't go his way, he's naturally going to escalate. And then you can predict that with each escalation, it's going to get worse, and there's going to be a new minimum expectation. a new disproportionate benefit that's going to be accounted for and allowed. It's never going to end well with that. If I was to give my advice for this parent, I would say you need to start implementing some consistency. I would say that in one respect, the expert is right, that you mustn't go in hard with this child straight away. Because if this child's already got used to a large amount of control, and it sounds like they have, that child is going to react really badly to that. Control freaks do. They will always escalate. If you go in really hard, that child is just going to push back really, really hard. But you've got to be firm and you've got to be consistent. You've got to now start projecting your minimum expectation on that child. And my minimum expectation is that you're going to be polite and you're going to be respectful. And every time the child doesn't do that, they have to understand that there's going to be an outcome. And that outcome can be something like you take their favourite toy away, time out. You could even try positive reinforcement, that the things that they really like to do, they get to do when they're polite and respectful, but only when they're polite and respectful. That's the new minimum expectation. You've got to be consistent with this. You've got to keep it up. When I think about consistency, I also think about another story that I knew. There was a lady that I knew that had 3 children. She had 2 boys and a girl, and she was the model of inconsistency. If she wanted to play with the kids could play, and the kids could do whatever they wanted. They could run wild. If she wanted cuddles, she was very, very affectionate, a little bit more with the daughter than with the boys, but very affectionate all the same. And if she wanted to treat them, they would go for days out. They would get to do whatever they wanted, however they wanted. They'd have a McDonald's and they'd all come home very happy. Flip side of that is that if she was tired or she was hungover, which was pretty often, she was a different person entirely. And this could change one day to the next. It could even change the same day. Then the children weren't allowed to be in the same room as her. And they certainly weren't allowed to play loudly. They had to go somewhere else in the house. If she wanted affection, for some reason, she was a little bit more affectionate with the boys than the girl for some reason. Not a massive difference, but there was a little difference there. And when it came to days out, they were just non-existent. And if they did happen, the children had to be seen and not heard. In contrast to that, the dad was a model of consistency, even if he didn't feel like it. He would play with the children, but there was a consistent expectation of behaviour with the children. Where the mum would let them run wild, he had rules about consistency and what was good behaviour. You weren't allowed to smack him in the face. You weren't allowed to kick your sister. You could play and you could enjoy yourself, but there was limits. There was a line you weren't allowed to cross. When it came to affection, everybody got the same affection. When it came to days out, they would go for days out and they'd have loads of fun, but he had an expectation about how those children would behave, not only with each other, but around others. He didn't want any other parent looking at his children and saying, those kids are wild, you can't take them anywhere, and pulling their kids away. Because he knew that there's also a societal expectation, a consistent societal expectation about how kids behave, what is good behaviour. And his motivation was that he wanted the best for his kids, and he never wanted them to be shunned by anybody. And he knew that to do that, they had to fit into a consistency as far as societal expectations are concerned. There was lots of problems in the marriage. As far as the mum was concerned, he was turning the kids against her, and she couldn't see that she had any part to play in it. But the problem was her motivation. Her motivation was all about what she wanted. If she wanted to play, it's because that's what she wanted to do. And if she wanted a cuddle, it's because she wanted a cuddle. Her motivation was all about the children fulfilling her needs. And if her needs were leave me alone, that's what the children had to do. And as parents, we've always got to question our motivations. Always. There's going to be times when your kids do something that you really want them to stop doing because it's getting on your nerves. But you have to ask yourself, is this really about what I want or what's right for the child? Again, if we go back to the dad in that story, his motivation was bringing them up the right way to make sure they were accepted, to make sure that other people wanted them around and other people looked on them as a good example of how to behave. His motivation was all about his children. Her motivation was all about her. Now, for lots of parents, our motivation is protecting our children, and rightly so, we understand that, don't we? It's all about putting rules in place to protect them against physical or mental harm. And in his case, it was about making sure that they were accepted and that they weren't rebuffed by people. Now, full disclosure, when my boy was little, I was a helicopter parent. I said that when he was born, there was a little switch went off in me about changing my ways, about being a better parent, but I also said I didn't get it right straight away, and I didn't. For about the first 5 years of his life, I was overprotective, to the extent that if he got invited on play dates with new parents I'd never met before, I insisted that either me or my ex went along and hung around for 10 minutes to suss the parents out, because I was protective of him being with a new adult who didn't know him, who I didn't know, and I didn't know what that new adult might do around or to my child. And I thought I was doing the right thing. She got very embarrassed about it. She said, well, it's awkward. I don't want to hang around there. They're not expecting me to hang around there. So it's really awkward. But in my arrogance, I didn't care, because I don't care how they feel. My job is to protect my boy, so I'm going to suss them out. And there's a knock-on effect of that, a knock-on benefit that they also know that that's what I'm like. So when I'm not there, they're going to be thinking about not doing anything wrong to my child. I look back at it now and I think, Jesus Christ, what were you thinking? But there was a knock-on benefit of that, in that there was plenty of parents who loved sending their kids to me, because they knew that not only was I really good with kids, I love kids, absolutely. Give me kids and dogs over adults any day. They knew that I would protect their children. If they wanted to go to the park, we'd go to the park. If they wanted to go swimming, we'd go swimming. And I wouldn't take my eyes off those kids. Nobody was going to come anywhere near those kids while they were with me. They knew that when the kids were with me, they were going to have fun and they were going to be protected. So we had plenty of play dates at our house. But I do look back and wonder how much I affected him being invited over to other places because of my behaviour. And I do regret that to some degree. When we set these rules for our kids, when we set these rules about protection, we have to question our motivation. Now, when he was about 7 or 8 and we divorced, me and my ex, we moved to a flat above a shop where we still are now. And there's a new park near us, and I can almost see it from my front window. And this was around about the time I was going through counselling and I was really starting to question my behaviour. And I started to question my motivation behind the protections I was putting in place and asking myself, was it for him or was it for me? And I had to be honest and say at least 50% of it is for me. Yeah, there was all kinds of imaginary scenarios where he could be hurt, so there was definitely something about him in those rules. But at least 50% of it was for me, and I knew that I had to change that. So when we moved here, above a row of shops, I made a point of sending him to the shops. I'd watch him out of the front window, looking out over the street, and I could see him go to the shops and come back. And then I started sending him to cross the road. There's a pedestrian crossing just down the road with some lights there. I knew he was going to want to go to the park sooner or later with his friends, and of course I'd take him there, but I knew he was going to want to do that on his own. So again, I'd send him down to the lights and I'd watch him out of the window, saw that he did it okay, he watched the road, he was safe. And then I thought, right, now it's time for him to go to the park. Because what I did was, I looked at my motivation and realised how much of it was for me after all, that I was imagining the worst possible outcomes. And because of those possible outcomes, I was stifling him. When we put these rules in place for our children, they're not going to be any use to anybody if they're never tested. We don't send our kids to school to learn all these subjects to end up getting a good job, and then when they leave school say, no, you can't go and do that job because it might be dangerous. We need to test that those things have worked, otherwise they're no good to anyone. We don't know if it's gone in one ear and out the other if we don't test it. Otherwise it's just for our benefit, isn't it? So I started sending him to the park. And he had a little phone with him, and I'd say, right, every 10 minutes, text me, tell me you're all right. And then it became every 20 minutes. And then it became every half an hour. And then it became just when you remember. And then it stopped happening. Pretty soon he had some friends coming round, and they wanted to go to the park. And the parents knew what I was like. They knew I was nearby. And I said, do you mind if the kids go to the park on their own? I'm very close, but Liam's got used to doing it and he's very, very good at it. He's really well behaved. And they said, yeah, that's fine with us as long as you're nearby. And I was. And I would make sure that if I ever got that feeling that things might be a little bit dangerous or he'd been gone too long, I'd just drop him a text saying, okay. And he'd reply going, yeah. And that was all I needed to know. And over the years, that stopped completely. The point is I started with baby steps because I knew I had to test my theories. I had to test whether the protection was for him or for me. And certainly in the early days, I could tell it was for me because of how nervous I was. He wasn't bothered. He was going down, crossing the road, going to the park, and it meant nothing to him. He was just happy to be going out. I was a bag of nerves sat on the sofa waiting for that text to say, hello, Dad, or I'm okay, Dad. And that told me everything I needed to know. It was much more about me than it was about him. And that's why you've got to question your motivations as a parent. There's lots of things can happen to our children nowadays. We know that. We know the world we live in nowadays. But we have to question what our motivation is. Is it about how we feel, or is it really only about protecting them? Over the years, my boy, just like I did, has come up against situations where he's had to react. He's had to suss people out and he's had to react accordingly without me being there. And I've had to trust that the lessons I taught him before I let go of the leash have worked. And as it happens, there's plenty of times he's come back to me and said, I remembered what you said then, Dad, or I remembered that time we had this conversation, and he's reacted accordingly. So I know those lessons have worked. But I would never have known that if you didn't get a chance to test them. Question your motivations. Be consistent with your children and question your motivations. Just going back to that lady who was doing the letters thing on her podcast where people were writing in with their problems, just to give you a reminder about am I the control freak? You can either drop something down in the comments or there's the email address and what have you here, and you can drop it there and I'll make sure it's anonymous. I won't share it with anybody. Be really keen to help people out where that's concerned. In the meantime, I'll leave you with a little change to the usual. Control the freak. Your kids to some degree, not other people. I'll see you next time. Behave.